I think that our dry suit story starts back in 2001 with the Xerotherm base layer, which, having launched it, took the market by storm. And we very quickly followed that up with the Arctic, which is a two-layer version, but based around the same principle of a very, very high-density fleece, which slows down the migration of air within the dry suit, but doesn't trap any air. And we translated that to a two-layer product, which is the Arctic, which became our best-selling product. And our brand began to be built around the pedigree of keeping divers warm under their dry suit. People were layering the Xerotherm underneath the Arctic, as we had intended in our original plan with the layering principle, and then and basically taking our products to the Arctic and Antarctica. We supplied BBC film crews who shot Planet Earth in the Arctic with Arctics and Xerotherms, and they came back saying they'd never been warmer on a similar kind of shoot. And this filtered through, and always in the backs of our mind was the ambition to develop a dry suit. But before we could get there, we started work on the Halo 3D, which is an undersuit which we designed specifically to be worn underneath a trilaminate dry suit. This is the Halo 3D here, and it has been designed with two things in mind. One is understanding of the physiology of the human body and how it responds to exposure, and the second one is how that exposure is actually manifest on a diver when they're in the water in terms of their trim, etc. Now, when you're in a dry suit, most of the time you're on horizontal trim and the air migrates into the back of the dry suit, squeezing the dry suit onto the chest of the diver. And most divers will experience that sort of little light relief as you push the valve to put the air back into the suit, and there's a slight suffusion of warmth that eventually sort of fades away as the air migrates into the back of the dry suit. This was actually a huge area of cooling on the torso, simply because there was very little you could do to actually keep the inside of the dry suit from pressing onto the body, and a lot of heat was being lost by conduction through the fibres of the undergarment and then into the water. So we spent a long time looking for a material which would actually prevent that from happening. And inside these panels on the chest and also on the thighs is a material which is flexible and compressible with a finger, but with the flat of one's hand, or indeed with one's dry suit, will not be compressed onto the skin. So you end up with an 8mm layer of air providing constant insulation, which previously was unavailable with any other dry suit. And that has enabled us to build a very low bulk suit, which packs a huge performance in terms of its thermal protection by insulating the right parts of the body, bearing in mind one's aspect in the water. There are disadvantages to this material. One is that it is buoyant, and therefore we couldn't just make a whole suit from it and expect somebody to sort of walk around Michelin Man style. So we also identified other key areas in the body where exposure is critical and you can't do much about it, and we augmented what was essentially the same basic design as our Arctic with extra layers of the high density fleece in these key areas. For example, the inside of the forearm we augmented with an extra layer of the fleece. This is where arterial blood will actually flows through the muscles up in the upper arm, but then when it gets into the lower arm it's actually flowing quite close to the skin surface here, and you can lose a lot of heat, which is why people's hands get cold very quickly. And it's actually an evolutionary adaptation that we have. Some people would argue it's an evolutionary throwback, but there are plenty of animals within the natural world that actually use this feature to a great advantage. Arctic wolves, for example, walk on the ice at -40 degrees. The pads of their paws are at -40. And they actually exchange the heat between the blood flowing out to their paws and the blood flowing back from their paws, so that they minimise the heat loss through their paws to the environment. As a consequence, with us, with a similar, somewhat less efficient system going on in our arms, our hands get cold, and we can operate with cold hands even when the rest of our bodies are quite warm. in order to maintain one's dexterity whilst diving, especially if operating cameras or any other complicated equipment, you want to try and maintain the flow of warm blood to the hands as much as possible in order to keep them mobile. So this area insulates the forearms. We added extra layers across the kidneys and the spine, especially given that more technical divers are using steel back plates, twin sets. There is actually a degree of compression on the back as well that will also promote cooling unless it's well insulated. So we tried to think about areas where you can't do much about the perfusion of blood, kidneys for one area, where if you can insulate it a little bit better, you're going to slow down the cooling process of the body. Finally, the thighs are insulated with this Space Tech material. They are, and you can't do, again, if you're finning a lot, you're going to get a lot of perfusion through your thigh muscles. And again, a lot of blood flow means that there's a lot of exposure to cooling, and there's not a huge amount of fat insulating your body on the thighs. The suit itself has other features generally aimed at the technical diver. It's pre-drilled for P-valves on both sides. It has a double-headed zipper for using the bathroom, but also some people has a root P-valve through there. And in the women's suit also has a comfort zip away for the seat, so they can use the loo without actually having to take the whole undersuit off. So that was the Halo. 2 years ago we launched that, and to great success, and it's been adopted by some very significant divers. The FBI, for example, is a good example. Most of their dive teams wear this, but equally National Geographic dive teams have been wearing this product, along with divers from NOAA. But the logical thing that was missing still in the range, and something we've been working on for years, has been a genuine dry suit to go with all of this dry suit underwear.